Zombies have always been a staple in the horror genre. As far back as we can remember, these hungry, undead creatures have always been pretty reliable as antagonists across numerous forms of media. Thus, it's no surprise that we've seen so many unique takes on these cannibalistic monsters over the years. However, it's still very rare for a zombie film to transcend the boundaries of this genre to depict something primal about the human condition. Well, somehow, Netflix's most recent zombie feature, Outside, manages to do just that and more. The Filipino drama has been garnering rave reviews due to its raw and unadulterated spin on the zombie genre, centering around the struggling Abel family. If you look closely, you'll find something much more disturbing than a zombie lurking behind the film's usually stoic facade: domestic abuse. Consider this a trigger warning because things are about to get pretty messed up going ahead, because in this marvelous video, we'll be breaking down the entire film along with its incredibly twisted ending. Please take a moment to hit the like and subscribe buttons. It might just be a small click for you, but for us it means an awful lot. With that out of the way, let's go. Outside, a brief recap. Imagine a world overrun with zombies, where almost all of civilization has collapsed. Humans are scarce, armies have fallen, and all that remains is death. This is the post-apocalyptic world in which we find the Abel family at the beginning of this film. The family consists of Francis and Iris and their two boys, Josh and Lucas. The film opens with some shaky, outdated handycam footage from Francis and Iris's wedding, before cutting to a deserted rural mansion. A blood-stained car draws up, and it soon becomes clear that its inhabitants have made it through literal hell to get here. This is Francis' parental home, and we watch him reluctantly enter the house. In a masterfully directed sequence, we wander through the large villa until we find ourselves in a dark bedroom. Here, on a king-size bed, we find Francis' deceased father. Francis walks up to the corpse and proceeds to relieve it of its gun and watch. As he walks out of the room, we hear a single word with a hoarse, cracked voice. We turn to find Francis' mother walking towards him, her body already consumed by the zombie virus. At the end of a gory, traumatizing ordeal, Francis is forced to shoot the old woman through the head. The family then decides to hole up in Francis' old mansion, which is hidden away from the main road. Here they find clean water and suitable accommodations, along with a huge expanse of sugarcane. Despite the comforts, it's evident that the house has its own share of dark secrets. Iris, Francis' wife, is visibly uncomfortable from the get-go, as she's fully aware of the abuse Francis has suffered at the hands of his father in this very house. However, Francis seems pretty set on the idea of staying in the house, and even the children go along with his desires for a little while. However, as time passes, Francis becomes a bit too attached to the crumbling old house and resists leaving even when his older son Josh mentions that many of his friends have traveled to emergency camps in the mountains. Over time, everyone else in the family begins to pressure Francis to move, but he keeps procrastinating. Then one day, the family decides to begin their drive north, but finds their path obstructed by a bridge littered with bodies and vehicles. When Iris tries to force her way through the obstruction, she's attacked by zombies. More zombies follow, and soon it's a full-on assault. The family manages to make it through by the skin of their teeth, but the incident just worsens Francis' paranoia. Though at the moment, it feels like Francis' fears are true. Something worse has already started taking root in the patriarch's psyche. Francis' slow descent into insanity. Francis' complete denial to seek help or venture outside comes from his innate desire to protect and control his family. This slowly turns him into an incredibly dominating father, who becomes increasingly brash towards his family members. He begins to believe that the only way to protect his family is to lock them up inside the house, and his erratic behavior escalates to great heights after one particular incident. One day, after a confrontation with Josh, Francis takes his elder son out into the fields and teaches him how to shoot. During this sequence, Francis' traumatic past and his fractured psyche begin overpowering him for the first time, and he forces the weeping boy to shoot the gun repeatedly until he can hit his target. Though Josh eventually hits his mark, the shots also have a rather unwelcome effect. They happen to draw all the zombies in the area toward the family, and the Abels are forced to take cover inside their mansion. However, the feeble walls of the villa are no match for a horde of zombies, and they begin to crash through the doors and windows. At the very last moment, when all hope seems lost, the family is saved by a car, which draws all the zombies away from the house. We eventually learn that the family's savior is none other than Francis' long-lost brother, Diego. Diego tells Francis that his own family had been completely infected, and thus he had come up to their parents' house to check on them. Though one would expect Francis to be relieved, he has quite the opposite reaction to his brother's presence. He lashes out and begins to taunt Diego by calling him Golden Boy. This helps us to deduce that Francis had always been the neglected child, and his parents favored Diego over him. Though Diego offers the family help and even agrees to take them to the nearby camp, Francis declines the offer. Francis points his gun at Diego until the poor guy drives away, and even tries to burn the map to the camp given by his brother. These actions clearly indicate that for Francis, it was no longer about keeping his family safe, but about maintaining control. Though going to the camp would have assured the Abels' safety, Francis lies to his family and holds them inside on the pretext of saving them. By this point in the film, it's pretty evident that the zombies are no longer the scariest things around. Iris' betrayal. Another pivotal scene that completely changes the way you look at these characters is the Christmas scene. Until now, the Abels have appeared to be a desperate yet fairly normal family. I mean, as normal as one can be with zombies roaming in the streets. But when things get extremely difficult due to Francis' denial to move, the children begin to suffer. In order to raise their spirits, Francis decides to host a Christmas party, which leads to the entire family sitting down at the dinner table. But as the conversation progresses, things get increasingly heated up between Francis and Iris. Iris tries to remind her husband that they're running out of food, which leads to Francis snapping. He begins to scream and begins to tell the children about how Iris had once planned to leave them. Iris defends herself by saying that it's not the children she wants to leave behind, but Francis. As you can guess, Francis doesn't take this lightly, and he spirals into a rant, accusing Iris of having an affair and even calling Josh a bastard when he tries to stop him. This sentence implies that Josh was never really Francis' child, which would go a long way toward explaining the man's disdain for the teenager. This scene also reveals that Francis' struggling marriage was another reason that made him go over the edge, and enhanced his desire to keep the family together by any means necessary. This incident would also have a deeper impact on Josh, which would lead him to make some pretty drastic decisions of his own. Why does Josh choose to run away? Josh, the elder son of the Abel family, is definitely the most normal and relatable character in this entire film. As a regular teenager, he isn't adjusting to the post-apocalyptic thing too well, and can often be found looking at his girlfriend's photos or just trying to contact the outside world via radio. As Francis' condition worsens and he begins to dominate the entire family with his nonsensical choices, Josh begins to drift away from his father. On a couple of occasions, he stands up in open defiance and even calls Francis out for his decision to remain in the house. Josh and Iris even come to the conclusion that the zombies are gradually weakening and will soon die out, but Francis still doesn't budge and refuses to go outside. The tension reaches its peak on the night of the Christmas party when Josh finally learns the truth about his parents. Unable to live under his father's control anymore, he sneaks into his mother's room. Here, we witness an extremely heartfelt scene between Josh and Iris, where the latter finally confesses that Diego is Josh's true father. Josh seems unperturbed by this revelation and states that he has always had his doubts. He also tells his mother that he can no longer stay confined inside the old mansion, and tells her of his decision to venture outside. Iris realizes that she will no longer be able to stop her son, and silently lets the boy go. Unlike Francis, most of Josh's decisions seem to come from a pretty rational place. Though it would be easy to brand his departure as something reactionary, one can't deny that the kid at least seems to have a plan. Why does Francis kill the soldier and steal his uniform? On the night of the Christmas party, the Abel family is also visited by a stranger who's begging for help. As expected, this sends Francis into a complete panic, and he tries to keep the guy out for as long as he can. He's eventually forced to give in, and we're introduced to a stranded soldier. He informs the family that the rest of his party had already been wiped out, and that the only reason why he'd managed to survive was Diego, who had directed him towards the mansion. The soldier also tells the rest of the family about the nearby camp, and Francis finally agrees to take him in for the night. But when Francis woke up the next morning, a terrible surprise awaited him. In the morning, Francis finally realized that Josh has managed to escape from the house. This would send the already overprotective patriarch to an extremely dark place, and the guy would finally lose it. Using a hammer from his toolbox, Francis creates a near-perfect replica of a Pollock painting on the kitchen wall using the man's skull. A broken Francis tries to tell his family of his greatest fear, that they'd leave him just like Josh did. This unnatural fear of losing control over his family would completely fracture Francis' psyche, causing him to become like the very parents who had abused him so many years ago. In order to keep everything together, Francis would even begin wearing the soldier's uniform, as young Lucas is particularly fond of army men, and all Francis really wants is to be the perfect father and protector. Why does Francis imprison Iris and Lucas? In his desperation, Francis finally turns on his family and locks up Iris and Lucas in the family's basement. This might seem like a pretty strange move, but from Francis' perspective, it all makes perfect sense. After all, what better way to stop your family from leaving you? Francis' insanity becomes even more evident when the guy slaughters a dog. Iris comes up with a genuinely clever plan, where Lucas distracts his father by pretending to be sick. Using this opportunity, Iris attacks Francis from behind, and somehow they manage to escape the basement. But the moment they can exit the house, the mother and child are attacked by a zombie. Diego and Josh are forced to run back inside. In the resulting skirmish, Iris and Lucas receive numerous injuries, and are only saved when the psychotic Francis makes it out of the basement. Francis is just about to turn on his wife, when a sob from Lucas alerts him to a much bigger problem. The boy has been bitten. What happens to the Abel family? Upon realizing that his youngest son is on the brink of being turned into a zombie, Francis suddenly loses all his strength. He lets go of Iris, who rushes to the boy to tend his wounds. As a nurse, Iris is able to assess the situation and decides to amputate the infected limb. Though the boy clearly suffers unimaginable pain during this entire incident, he's finally saved due to his mother's medical expertise and quick thinking. All this while, Francis has been going through something of an existential crisis and seems to snap out of his insanity. Iris calls out to him and instructs him to get a car, which leads the broken father toward the same bridge where the family had first been attacked at the beginning of the film. Francis tries to get their old car started, but you already know that these things never start, especially in horror films. Suddenly, Francis encounters the elder son Josh, who's on his way back to the mansion to save his family. The boy happens to have a gun in his hand, and well, accidentally shoots his father in the chest before Francis can identify himself. In the last moments, Francis tells Josh that he never despised him, and even accepts the latter as his own son. Francis confessed that the old house and its traumatic memories had managed to get under his skin, and turned him into something that he was not. As Josh stands there, weeping for his father, a car approaches from the distance, indicating that help has arrived. Though the film ends on a hopeful note, the entire family seems completely scattered despite being saved. And maybe that is the true horror of Outside. The symbolism behind Francis' watch in Outside explained. From the very beginning, Francis' father's blood-stained watch is depicted as an important symbol. As the film runs its course, we realize that the watch has no special significance to anyone except Francis, as the little thing symbolizes the cycle of abuse that runs through the Abel family. It tells us how violence and trauma can be handed down through generations, and corrupt even the ones we love the most. Josh leaving his father's watch behind is an indication that things are finally changing, though not without a cost. Why does Iris sing her wedding song at the end of Outside? While Josh mourns his father on the bridge, we cut back to Iris and Lucas waiting inside the old mansion. Wounded and battered, the mother and child sit down on the floor and wait for help to arrive. In that quiet moment, Iris begins to hum the old wedding song from the handycam footage at the beginning of the film. This undoubtedly is an attempt by Iris to remember Francis as the man he once was, and maybe even a plea for his return. But as we all know, that will never really come to pass. The true meaning of Outside's ending. Though the film is essentially a survivor horror centered around zombies, it manages to depict something much more poignant. It tells us how abusive parents and violent tendencies can be passed through generations, and almost states that love is the only way we can be saved. In the end, we see Francis turning way worse than any of the monsters the family has faced so far. And it's that turn that makes this movie genuinely scary. I mean, zombies are terrifying, but humans are undoubtedly much worse. Marvelous verdict. Outside is definitely one of the most unique and well thought out genre flicks that we've seen in a while. Though it sticks to its genre until the very end, the zombies never really feel like actual threats, and it's the internal fractures between the Abel family that take us to some pretty dark places. If blood, gore, and psychological trauma are your thing, please check out the film because you won't be disappointed. That's it for this one, but don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons to stay up to date with all of our marvelous content. Now it's time for goodbye, but don't worry because we'll catch you in the next one.